Hello and welcome to the opening episode of our third season of the My Life in Rugby interview series as we kick things off with a bang. With the top 14 nearing a return, Irish fans are more excited than ever given the strong ties. Our first guest is at the forefront of that, building a name for himself as an attacking coach at one of Club Rugby's most exciting teams. With me to look ahead to the upcoming season and to delve on his windy path to Bordeaux is former Ireland under-20 head coach Noel McNamara. Noel, very welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Not at all. Thanks, Kellen. Thanks for having me.
It's always good to have you. And I know this is a rugby podcast. And I know we have to talk about rugby, but there's an elephant in the room. That's the fact that you're a Clare man. And I know there's going to be Limerick people, like Cork people, listening to this, so they can skip ahead if they want. But Limerick or Clare are All Ireland champions. You were there. Must be a nice all feeling before you kick off a new season yourself.
Yeah, listen, it was a fantastic day. I went with my wife and three kids, and yeah, I suppose for us, we actually were back in Clare the week before, and spent the week in the lead up to the final in Clare, and yeah, it's a fantastic part of our Irish heritage and our history, and yeah, great for the girls to be able to experience it, and yeah, for me, I loved it. Obviously, it's the GA is an incredible part of Irish society, and I know lots of people that are involved in it and how much it means to them as well. And yeah, it's incredible, really. I sent some pictures and some clips to some of the boys back here, and the struggle to get their head around it is probably the best description for it. Yeah, but it was a brilliant day. Really, really, really fantastic. And although I left at halftime or at full time, I thought the game was over. So we had to rush back in as people figured out, no, it actually goes to extra time. But yeah, in terms of a sporting event, in terms of the drama, the spectacle, the amount of times, the lead changed hands, incredible, really incredible.
I don't know why, but you've got an image in my head now of Damien Penaud and Maxime Lucu maybe potentially playing hurling at some stage. And I just really want to see that just because we've seen it with like Lions tours and everything. It's a cool crossover, but maybe another time when someone can send over hurls or something. No, you're the first active coach we've had in the show, so I kind of want to pick your brain on that and all that has to offer. But the first thing that stood out to me when I was kind of looking up yourself is the pathway and how unique it is, and maybe that's a good thing because you got schools rugby, you got club rugby, you got provincial Ireland under 20 like Clongo, Glenstal, Ireland, the Sharks, of course, Bordeaux now. Like from your own perspective, that must be an asset in and of itself. The fact that yeah, fair enough, worked your way up, but you've got so many different ideas and mindsets and age groups and so many different types of squads in your relatively short few years coaching.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a short few years, Kellen. It's nearly 20 years now.
I said relatively, in fairness.
Yeah. First group was in 2004 in Glenstal. So yeah, listen. From my perspective, I have to look at it as an asset because I can't change it. So I think for everybody, your experience is an amalgamation of what you've done over a period of time. And for me, it's been a fantastic journey. It's taken me to some incredible places around the world, and yeah, some really, really unique places and unique experiences. And you're right in what you say in terms of being an asset. That the reality is, I suppose I've spent a long time and thoroughly enjoyed getting to the point that I am now. And I suppose you mentioned kind of the development part. I think that was really important for me. It's something that I thoroughly enjoyed. It's something that I feel I took a lot from, and eventually you get to the stage where you want to test yourself at the next level, and that's probably what it came about. I think the 20s is probably for me was the pinnacle of development rugby and age grade rugby and probably the amateur game. I think I spoke about it before about being that phase where you're learning to win. And it's not about being afraid of winning. It's not about winning being something that you never want to have as an ambition. But it's not the ultimate goal. It's not. There isn't people that live and die by it, or whatever way you want to phrase that. And I thoroughly enjoyed that part and really missed it when I finished up. And that was probably the primary motivation for going and looking for something. Obviously, eventually the opportunity arose with the Sharks, but that kind of was the journey, and that's how it took place. I loved what I was doing. It kind of came to a natural end, if you like, with the Irish 20s. And then it was okay. Well, what is the next step? But certainly, I would feel strongly that that journey equipped me to deal with the next stage, if you like. So there never was a massive jump. It was always a case of, well, the next step is kind of a natural progression, as much as anything else.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that, because the word that I kind of based one of my next questions around was rewarding when it comes to Ireland under 20s, because like we'll touch on maybe a few years there in a minute, but like in hindsight, you got Caelan Doris, James Hume, Dan Sheehan, Tom Ahern, Joe McCarthy, Jack Crowley, to name just a few guys at the pinnacle of the URC, at the top end of international rugby. And your role and the other coaches that were there were developing high caliber players like this. Does it feel rewarding then? Maybe not at the time, but in hindsight, the fact that you were a part of it, even just a small part of these players' development.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I would reflect on that too much, to be honest with you. It is a small part. I think at the time you want to do the best with the team that you have. I think all the players that you mentioned had very different pathways as well. And at the 20s, it was very different. The reality for Dan Sheehan, for example, who is, I think most line selections you would see at the moment, he would be the starting hooker. But Dan wasn't the first choice under 20s hooker. The reality was the first choice was Ronan Kelleher. The second choice was Dermot Byrne. I don't think anyone would agree with or disagree too much at the time, and both of them have gone on and had fantastic careers. Owen Clark was involved as well in the Six Nations. Dan was involved as well, and as as time went on, with a couple of injuries, Dan did come to the fore. But I think he'd be the first to admit that there was parts of his game that he really needed to develop. And whilst there was, and that's where I come back to the learning to win and the development part. The reality is you can identify players that have the potential to go on and be successful, and you can identify them at lots of different stages and lots of different ages. But ultimately, it's up to them to fulfill that. And success will never be linear. The reality was, I think Dan's first contract with Leinster was very, very short term. And there are some sliding doors moments there as well. When Owen Clark ended up going to Munster, then Dan got the opportunity in the Leinster Academy. So I think the reality is it's trying to stay balanced in all of that and trying to provide the players with what's required at whatever given time it is in their development. You look at Tom Ahern now and the journey he's gone on. Started off as a fullback down in Waterford, went to second row, had probably a unique skill set and has found a home in the system that Munster play and is incredibly effective at that. So I think for me, it's not looking back and saying, well, this guy, that guy. I didn't mention Dylan Tierney-Martin, who came on in the last game of the World Cup and has gone on and had a fantastic career with Connacht and hopefully will continue to develop as well. So I think every player has their own story, and it's trying to do the best that you can possibly do for them at that given moment. And that's what the 20s is about. It's not about closing doors and guys. It's trying to help them all, and hopefully there'll be an opportunity. I think I've spoken before about someone like Barry Daly, a fantastic under-20s player. He did go to the academy down in Munster initially, didn't work out, went and played AIL, was working as an accountant, and got an opportunity in Leinster at 26 years of age and ended up winning the Champions Cup and a Pro 14 title as it was at the time. So I think that's the nature of being involved in development rugby. It's helping people wherever you can to try and take that next step, whatever it might be. And sometimes it's providing them with what they need. And sometimes that's been told at this point in time it's not good enough. That's been told that this is the areas that need to get better. Sometimes it's difficult conversations. Sometimes it's easy. Someone like Caelan, by and large, he had a very, barring a couple of injuries, he had a very linear progression from being, probably the best, certainly one of the best schoolboy rugby players I've ever seen at 15 years of age in a senior cup final against Clongowes, to the Irish under-20s captain, to playing for Leinster and now going on a captain in Ireland. So I think in a roundabout way, what am I trying to say? It's not about looking at, well, it's him, and him. It's hoping that you did the best for a group of players, not all of whom will go on and play professional rugby, but hopefully you provided an environment and an opportunity for them to get better, to improve, to enjoy it. which, you know, probably is something with reflection at the start was difficult to get right, and probably something now that I've probably more of an awareness of. It's really, really important that you know, the environment is positive, it's enjoyable, it stretches people, it challenges them, and challenges and also cares for them and helps them to get better.
No, I can absolutely see that. And it's funny you mentioned about like not being afraid to lose and not being afraid to win and all that. And that's where it's probably one of the things the difference, because you get these players for a block, a Six Nations block and a World Cup block. And I know there's meetups and camps and different things. But that's very different to club rugby. And like, how does that challenge compare when you were kind of going to, say, when you went from that role into the Sharks? Like, you were going from having these unbelievable players, wonderfully talented, but you have to put them together and build cohesion very quickly. Then you go to a club where, like, the Sharks is probably the exact opposite insofar as they have that Curry Cup team underneath, and there is a very, like, to use your own word, lineal progression there with their kind of path. How does it compare between the two in terms of when you're under 20s coach and getting these lads in and putting it all together?
Yeah, I suppose the nature of the 20s is it's cyclical. You know, the reality is you get almost a completely new group of players. There might be a couple of guys that will carry through. It's very difficult to copy and paste. You got to try and find I suppose, you know, marry what, you know, the beliefs of the coaching group to the profile of the players. There's lots of similarities with what it was in South Africa. I think, you know, one of the things in South Africa that was a big challenge was just you know, the availability of your top players. There's a lot of very good players at the Sharks, and obviously that's evident by the number of Springboks. And I think, you know, probably saw it in the Challenge Cup last year, but probably equally reflected in some of the challenges that they had in the URC. So it's for them, I think it's about finding the balance between the depth of the squad and bridging that gap. And the challenge, you know, there's lots of talent in South Africa, but the academy systems are not really well developed. And there's also a huge player drain. You know, the reality is lots of players leave South Africa regularly. So, you know, that was probably the biggest challenge at the Sharks. You know, I think when I arrived first, you know, I was in the midst of we went into a Curry Cup. We played the Curry Cup. Then you had the start of the URC, but you did so without a large cohort of players. Then those players returned. You play a block with them into Europe, and then they go on an enforced break for 8 weeks. So just, you know, trying to get consistency and you mentioned cohesion, trying to implement, you know, some changes as well and bring about probably, you know, our identity and trying to develop and establish our identity. And for me, there probably was that learning part as well, where, you know, in my head, I had a very clear view of what, you know, a successful attack might look like. But probably the thing that was missing for me was understanding I need to bring the best of what they already had as well. I needed to understand them, understand their culture, understand what makes them tick. And you can't just say, well, this is what worked here for whatever Leinster team or Irish team, and it's now going to work over there. So that was probably a big learning curve for me, and probably something that, you know, I think really has stood to me. And obviously the learning from that I could transfer through to when I came here to Bordeaux, and understanding again that, you know, what worked for us there isn't necessarily going to exactly be possible to replicate here. So I think that's what I would probably say. It's understanding as well when you're involved in something, you know, for a long time in Leinster. I started in 2011. I ended up leaving in 2020. So, you know, almost 10 years, and you think everywhere is the same. I think everywhere, you know, this system of you know, and you can say the same for the Irish system, you know, in terms of the other provinces as well, but just lots of good young players coming through every year and putting a lot of pressure on players that are in front of him. Very happy to stay in the same place, in the same province, and wait for their opportunity. You know, the reality in South Africa is players move between the provinces regularly. Sometimes for 1 year, they'll move to another one. And then there's also, you know, the lure of moving overseas. You know, there's players from South Africa and Japan. There's players in, you know, every top league in the world, I think, is the reality. So, lots and lots of challenges around that, and lots of learning, and as I said, lots of positives as well. You know, I had a fantastic time in Durban. I thoroughly enjoyed working with the Sharks, and you know, learned a huge amount while I was there as well.
And it must be a cool experience. Like, listen, you're not that far removed from it, I know, but to even just stand back and say you're working with the likes of, say, the Kanyuam, Makazole, Mapimpi, like World Cup winners, world stars, and as well as that, you can learn so much off them. You're not just coaching them, but you can learn off them as well, can't you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's the reality. You know, you want to try and get the best out of them, and equally there's an opportunity to learn as well. You know, it's for me, it was very much just a group of people that you want to try and connect with, and you want to try and establish an identity. You want to try and establish you know, the best possible working environment that we can, and then get the best out of them. You know, it is really as simple as that. And I think you know, by and large, that was something where we succeeded. You know.
Absolutely. And just, I'll get more on the Sharks and Bordeaux in a minute, but just on the 20s, just going back there for a minute, like you would have taken charge in World Cups, and we did a recap pod on this channel after the last under 20 World Cup and just spoke about how Willie Falloon, to his credit, really did well at getting, you know, guys who are going to be there next year into the squad, like say, you know, someone like Max Flynn, for example, and they did the same thing last year with Evan O'Connell, and just giving them good minutes to kind of expose them, even, you know, just in that block. How does that World Cup look from a coaching perspective? Because you probably do have one eye on next year. Yes, you want to win, but then there's also, what, 5 days between games as well. It's probably a very fine balancing act, I suppose, is it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a fine balancing act, and I think the ambition is definitely there to win it. I think you know, a lot of credit would go to somebody like Peter Smith, who has been there. He was there in my last year and before him, Collie McEntee, who did a very good job. But you know, Peter ultimately has responsibility for all the 4 academies in Ireland, and would have responsibility for the Irish underage teams as well. So you know, someone like Peter would always be there to give a steer and yeah, advice in terms of that. I think as well, as I said, it is about finding the balance between exposing players, helping them to develop, and equally doing what's best for the team. You know, and I think the nature of the World Cup is challenging for Ireland in particular, around the time it is in the season for young players. You know, and I think we've got better at it now. But you know, I remember my first year. I think, you know, the guys do their leaving cert, then they start training for what was then the under-20 interprovincial campaign, and kind of the Celtic Cup as it was. So that kind of started in July, August. Then they go into the AIL. You know, you play the Six Nations. You're back into the AIL. Some of them are involved in senior setups, and then eventually you come around to a World Cup kind of the end of June, and it's like it's been an 11-month, 12-month season. You know, it's very difficult to to get that right and be at your best at that point in time. So I do think there is definitely you know, a balance, and I think, you know, there has to be huge credit to how the Irish underage and development system held up during COVID. I think, you know, when you look at some of the other unions and how they've really struggled, you know, let off an awful lot of staff, development staff, lost a lot of good people, and you know, I think for some countries that will end up being a missing generation. It'll be really fascinating to look back in, you know, 8-9 years time and look at what was the consequence of that for the Wales and the Scotland in particular, who really struggled during that period. But I think, you know, a lot of credit is owed to people who, and it's a lot of people. You know, you can talk about the schools and the clubs who initially introduced the players and work with them. You can talk about, you know, again, I know specifically around Leinster, but someone like Dave Fagan is somebody who does, you know, an incredible amount of work, you know, in terms of developing these guys and preparing them and getting them ready. And as do all the sub academies and the academies in the provinces as well. So, yeah, very lots of different parts to that answer, Calum. But I do think it's nuanced. I do think, you know, the reality for the coach and the players at the time, they want to win. You know, they want to win games. And I think for the coach, you're trying to find the best balance. I think, you know, there will be at the back of your mind as well, if you've got somebody who but it won't be giving somebody the opportunity for the sake of giving him the opportunity. It will be because genuinely he can improve the group and with a view that he is somebody who has potential for the future.
Absolutely, and it comes across as being a very difficult job in that regards, because very few rugby coaches have to plan for 3 games in 10 days or whatever, just because it's that attrition of a sport. So to be able to do it is something. And for Ireland to be as good as they were, I know this World Cup they had like a cancelled game, and they had, their scrum kind of just got demolished by English lads who were playing Premiership rugby scrummaging, which is an entirely different level. But at the same time, it is very well managed. And like, I know a couple of lads who play AIL that have played alongside some of these under 20 players. They were stood down from the end of the season with AIL because it's a long season. And like, there's that side of things as well, like there's so many different moving parts, and it's a sign that if we can praise these things, then there's obviously something going right. And they have the silverware as well to show for it. We could talk about the under 20s all day because I'm a huge fan of it, but we do have Bordeaux and Durban and all that, the sunnier times to get into it. It's been nicer weather than Donnybrook in February, or Musgrave Park in February. Just on Bordeaux, you linked up with them last season. They went all the way to the top 14 final, and for those who may not know, Antoine Dupont did what Antoine Dupont does in that final, and that's as much as anyone needs to know, because that's what he's like. But if you don't mind me asking, like, you go from Durban to Bordeaux, how do moves come about like that in rugby these days? Because we often hear about how players move along, but we very rarely hear about how coaches move along.
Yeah, it was pretty straightforward, to be honest. In the start of my second season at the Sharks, there Yannick Brew, who was just finished at Bayonne, he was friends with the CEO of the Sharks, so he came over in a kind of a consultancy role. He was taking a break from coaching. He had done a long stint playing with Toulouse and France, in coaching Toulouse and France, and then as head coach of Bayonne. So he took a sabbatical for a year. He came over. He did some consultancy work with the Sharks around the contact area. So breakdown, tackle, both sides of the ball, and probably just developed a relationship with him here. And he was appointed as the Bordeaux coach during the season, and for us, we thoroughly enjoyed our time over there, but we're probably getting to the point where, from a family perspective, being closer to home was something that we were keen to do, and that's really how it came about. And there's probably a part of me that underestimates challenge sometimes, and despite the fact that I didn't have any French, I didn't see it as being a big problem. We just happened from there, really. I think, when you look at Bordeaux, the reality was, one, you look at the playing pool, the quality of the players that are here, which is, very high. You look at the ambition of the club, got a president who's very ambitious, who's clear and on the direction he wants the club to go. You look at the city; it's a nice place to live with, good quality of life for the family, really, I suppose. And I think, when all those factors are taken into consideration, it was a pretty appealing prospect. I think as well, for us, because we'd made that move to go abroad, it kind of, it just felt like, rather than going back and then maybe going again, it's less than something I think ultimately it was just felt like a good decision and the right decision, and I think that's probably been backed up last season as well.
I can understand how, as an attack coach, the prospect of working with Matthew Jalibert and Damien Pennell will be enticing, to say the least. But I was going to ask about implementing your style, but now that I know that you didn't have any French when you went in last year, it's a different question. But how do you implement a style at a club that is they're just so jouet rugby in their own way? Like, is it about fitting philosophy around the players, or how does early training implementation work? Because probably worth noting for listeners at home as well, you would have joined pre-World Cup, and then you would have been without a couple of players, and the French season, for those who may not remember, you came back, played a few games, and paused. So what was that like in the first, I would say, pre-season, but in reality, the nearly 2 pre-seasons you get?
Yeah, ironically, the last playing style was very kick heavy, and was probably very much based on occupation and pressure rugby. So the players were probably keen for a change. And that was probably the first thing, I think, in terms of there was a real willingness to embrace something a little bit different. There certainly is and as I mentioned already, a kind of a learning from that experience at the Sharks. It's looking at the profile of the team. It's not trying to change everything. It's trying to keep the good parts and keep the parts that were running well, and then probably bring about some of the other changes. I think I mentioned before, around the Sharks, what's tactically desirable must be technically possible. So there was technical stuff that we had to work on. We were lucky in the preseason. We had a longer preseason last year. I think I mentioned to you, this year is particularly short. But yeah, as you mentioned, we came back, we trained, we played 2 match amicable or two friendlies. Then we played 3 games in the top 14. We managed to win 2 of those. We lost the other one away to Racine. And then the World Cup happened. So it was a big break. We came back for a week, and then we're straight back into it. And obviously you're dealing with the disappointment of the French players and how that home World Cup played out for them. So there's lots of different human elements to that as well when they were coming back. But certainly as they came back in, experienced a group, they were very open to something new, and were very motivated to embrace that and ultimately to improve. I think for me, the language was actually a real positive in that I had to be incredibly simple in the message, incredibly just, the 45-minute, 50-minute meetings weren't possible due to my lack of French. And just, I suppose, embracing lots of different ways of trying to get your message across. Individual conversations, incredibly important. The influencers within the team, incredibly important. In meetings, pictures, videos, and short, sharp messages. Obviously helped by some of the other coaches having fantastic English, and lots of players having it as well. But I also benefited from Yannick from day one saying you present in French. So it's absolutely, this is what I want you to do, and sitting in on a couple of meetings and challenging me to speak more French as well. So the first period was incredibly difficult. I've often laughed about it. I felt like a baby. I needed naps in the evening because my brain was so sore from trying to think and translate and process everything in French. But it's got easier now, thankfully.
And I know it's not something that you know firsthand, but is it similar then for players? Because like Joey Carberry's going over there this year, Zach Holmes was there last year. Positions where you need to be very, very vocal in midfield, but they come from English-speaking countries. So for them, is it like, do you think there's the same strain, or do you think it's just about your competency with languages, I suppose, when you go to a country like France?
Yeah, listen, the challenge is similar no matter what. You're going to have to speak in French on the pitch, and there's lots of different ways of communicating. I discovered that pretty quickly. I do think there's probably more of an onus if you're coaching over there to you're going to have to present and I think the players can take it a little bit slower. I do think the key positions, as you mentioned, at 10 in particular, is important. But someone like Joey's been working hard at it and has already demonstrated a reasonable grasp on rugby French. And rugby French is different to French. You can learn rugby French pretty quickly and speak the general terms around the game and everything like that. So I think once you get rugby French, you can start to build on some of the other stuff. And then, the big challenge is the conversational French, and the conversational French with multiple people is the ultimate goal. So when you can sit down with 3 or 4 French people and keep up to speed with the conversation as it's going across the table, that's the big challenge.
I can only imagine. Now, I haven't told too many people that you're coming on the podcast yet because the full guest list isn't ready. But when I did say to one friend of mine, he wanted to know about how you as a coach go to deal with different players. And he kind of wants to talk about, can you train a player like, say, Damien Penault, for instance? Or is it about using their instincts? Because again, to go back to the language point, you're just in the door. Obviously, lads like him would have been at the World Cup, and like the top name players would have been at the World Cup. When you're implementing a scheme, how much is scheme versus instinct and game sense, I suppose?
Yeah, I suppose ultimately, I think the thing I would say about that is, of course, you have to coach him, but you have to coach him to play in this team. That's what it's about. It's trying to coach him to bring the best out of him playing for UBB. It's not about coaching him. Damien is unique. There's no question about that. And like I said before, lots of times I've been in training and watching games. We're like, oh, don't do that. Oh, bravo, well done. You enjoy.
I can only imagine with that back line as well.
And that's the nature, But for me, we have a lot of freedom within our team, but we have responsibility to the team as well. And what is it about? It's about bringing the best out of the players that we have. It's not about it has to be this, it has to be that, it has to be the other. It's about bringing the absolute maximum out of the players that we have, but together, and that's the reality. I think no matter how good of a player you are, you can't do it on your own. And whilst Damien will bring fantastic things to the team, he's not going to go out there and beat players on his own. So I think that's probably the best description I could give it. It's not about coaching him to conform to a certain, this is what, Makazola Mapimpi would do, or this is what, James Lowe does, or this is what he did, be you, be the best possible version of you, but ensure that it's for the best interest of the team. And for me, it's about trying to get him on the ball as much as we possibly can, but in the right areas as well. It's definitely been something that he's embraced, and he's obviously brilliant for us last season. The challenge now is for us to evolve and get better again.
And I can only imagine that's where adaptability probably kicks in as well, because so many coaches will go to places and this is what they want and this is what you do. But anyone who watched Bordeaux last year, like say, I'm saying this because it's a personal favorite, but take the Saracens game, for example, where everything clicks and everything seems to go right. That's not entirely, 80 minutes of a perfect coach game either. It's the players implementing and the players getting to a flow. You have to be adaptable, I suppose, as well as that the season is so long. You couldn't possibly just have one system and it work all year as well.
No, and the reality is, Keelan, for me, the defense gives you your attack. So that's it. The big rugby pitch, there's lots of space, and that's what we do. We play the space, we play the big space, and we try and play quickly. And to do that, you need good players. You need players who are good at reading space and good at reading each other. And that's the reality of how we play. We try and put people into good spaces and then they play off each other. And for us, that's where we would hope to continue to get better. The ability to read each other's body language as well as reading defenders' body language and understanding what's going to happen next. And sometimes it can be very unpredictable. And that's one of the beauties as well, I suppose, of when you're trying to be an unpredictable attack, sometimes you're unpredictable to your teammates as well. So for us, it's just trying to get better around that, to be honest. But yeah.
And we were talking before you came on, it was slightly different about the season and the season length. And, we mentioned there about how the players had the World Cup and then they go not straight back into top 14, but pretty quickly into the top 14 after World Cup heartbreak. You got Six Nations in there. Come the end of the season, was it harder for the players to get up for those games? I know it's still top 14 final and semi-final that they won. There was European Cup agony as well. Does it become that bit more difficult for the players, you think, in a season like last year? Because, like, personally, from following it, I couldn't imagine how the players could go to the well, for instance, 15 times between January and June or July or whenever the season finished.
Yeah, I think, listen, the nature for us was the top 14 is unique in terms of how you qualify for the final stages. So, if you finish in the top two, you go direct through to a semi-final. If you finish third, then third will play sixth at home, and then fourth will play fifth at home. And then third will play the second, or the winner of that third versus sixth will play the second in the semi-final. Semi-finals are the neutral venue. The neutral venue this year was Bordeaux. So for us, as you can imagine, there was incredible motivation to play the semi-final in Bordeaux. Unfortunately, we didn't qualify in the top two, and there's a variety of different reasons for that, but we didn't have the consistency in our level of performance to get to that point. So come the end of the season, we're probably chasing results, trying to qualify in that top two, trying to make the semi-final. You know, and we probably didn't rotate. We had a couple of you know, significant injuries to some of our best players, and ironically, you know, not who you might think. You know, the reality was we lost Nicolas de Portera and Roman Buras against La Rochelle in a game at Chaban, and you know, there were two incredible losses for us. We lost a couple of forwards as well, but those two guys in particular. And then, you know, we kind of went with the same team consistently week after week. But exactly as you say, at the end of a long season, and you know, the reality when we came to the final, it was just one game too many. You know, you mentioned Dupont. You know, it was yes, but it was a fantastic performance by Toulouse, and you know, unfortunately, a terribly disappointing performance by us. And the result was what it was. You know, so there are reasons for it. Obviously, we've gone into it in a lot of detail, as you can imagine. And you know, as I remember, you know, there's lots of different times you look at lessons, but you know, we played in the old B&I Cup in, I think it was the Leinster A coach, probably back in 2017, maybe. And we played against Bristol, you know, a full strength Bristol Bears team. We went away to Doncaster, who were an incredible team at the time. We won both of those games, and we won all our home games comfortably. And then we played Doncaster Knights in the last game of the group stage at Donnybrook. You know, it should really have been an easy game. It wasn't. We got too far ahead of ourselves. We lost, and the result for us was we ended up playing the final away from home because Ealing ended up being the top seed, and Ealing won the final. And, you know, it's understanding that often the final result, you can look at it, but the reality was it was an event that happened much earlier than that was within your control. You know, and for us, you know, we played Stade Francais in a game at Chaban much earlier in the season where we should have won. We were winning and you know, didn't see the game out. And there's lots of other little time moments during the season as well. So it's just understanding that sometimes you can place too much emphasis on that final result and understand that maybe lots that go before it. You know, I'll give you an example. After the Champions Cup final, pretty much every member of that starting Toulouse team was in Dubai on holidays, you know, and giving themselves an opportunity to recharge, refresh, and prepare for the final sprint. You know, the following games, they're, you know, what many termed at the time a C team went to Montpellier, who were desperately scrapping to survive and had a fantastic win down in Montpellier. Which ensured that Toulouse finished as top seed. So it's understanding there's lots of other little bits and pieces that go into it as well.
I can imagine. And you mentioned Champions Cup there. I might just get into that for a second, because I think in our Irish mindset, we could never understand that some clubs aren't big on Champions Cup. And I'm not saying Bordeaux are necessarily won them, because their stadium is probably more inclined with the competition than themselves. But like, you look at how La Rochelle have taken to it in recent years. Yourselves, Bordeaux, have. From your point of view, what's that mindset like different to, say, Leinster, for instance, and Leinster players? Because for Leinster, it is, we want that fifth star. It is so important. But in France, like, the Bouclier is kind of the one to win as well. So when you were in that competition, I'm sure you're 100% focused. But in general, what is the difference like from being on the ground?
Yeah, I suppose some of it is you got to look back at the historical context as well. You know, the Bouclier has been contested for such a long period of time. It's such a historical competition. You know, the reality of the URC, and I think it has made massive strides, but it is still very much a new competition. You know, you go back to, you know, the old Interpros, if you like, from that into what was the Celtic League, into the Pro 12, into the Pro 14, into the URC. So it's lots of iterations of the competition. I think from the outset, you know, the Irish provinces embraced Europe in a very, very special way. I agree. You know, some of the French teams have, some of the French teams haven't. And that's the reality, partly because you know, I think for us, you know, even in the Champions Cup, when you know, you arrive at the stadium, if you play La Rochelle on a Sunday night or a Saturday night, it'll be 5,000 people to greet you off the bus. that's the reality. You know, for a Champions Cup, there might be 1,000. You know, it is the level of engagement of the supporters is a little bit different. They have, you know, this intense rivalry when they play each other, and it's not necessarily the same when they play, and that's you know, largely historical. It's largely. I do think, you know, as you mentioned, La Rochelle. You know, for us, it certainly is something that our players are keen to test themselves against the best players in Europe. Yannick is you know, obviously coming from his background is similar, but you know, you look at this year's Stade Francais, they had zero interest. You know, they didn't put out their strongest team. You know, they were happy not to play in the Challenge Cup. It was very much a case of, okay, we're going to give an opportunity to our non-GIF players in these windows, and you know, some of the younger guys, and focus everything in on the top 14. It is important to understand as well, Caelan, I think, like, you know, in the URC, you play 18 regular season games. In the top 14, you play 26. So you already have 8 more games. On top of that, you could have potentially 3 more if you get to the final. So that's 11 more games. And then you're saying, okay, well, you're going to put in 4 more European games. And then the last thing that I'll say is, you know, Ajax got relegated this season from the top 14. We went and played Ajax. We were on the back of a 7-game winning streak, and we were hanging on for dear life. We needed a last-minute try to win over there. So there's just no easy games. It just doesn't exist. You know, it's just incredibly competitive week in, week out. And if you're not on it, and you know, we had 1 or 2. We'd one where we went away and played Cast, and we weren't on it. We got smashed. Like it wasn't. You know, it was. Yeah, a pretty big spank. So I think there are lots of reasons for it. As I said, I think there are clubs that will continue to be very much all in. And I remember going to Connacht last year, and everyone's like, oh, you know, Bordeaux are bringing their second team, and you know, they're almost kind of this idea that had to be the case, and then there was the disappointment that it wasn't the case. You know, so yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how it evolves, but I don't think it's going to change en masse. I think you will have a number of clubs that will be very much committed to it, but I think you will have others who will just make the decision that, you know, unfortunately, we already play X amount of games. It's impossible for us to really go full noise at this.
And it's completely understandable as well, because like, you can put yourself into the shoes of being a Munster fan, Leinster fan, whoever, and think it's not the fairest form of competition. And that's absolutely true. But at the same time, as you said, there's 8 more games. It has to come from somewhere. Rugby is already, like, if there was a chance to make the world 55 weeks long, I think rugby are the first ones to put their hands up. Like, that's the direction we're going in. So I completely understand that as well. But I just want to get back to the final for a minute, because we'll wrap things up soon. Yes, it was a heavy defeat and all that, but does yourself and Yannick Prue and the other coaches, you sit back now, you're on preseason at the moment, and you look at kind of the strides that have been made last season and so forth? Because again, the nature of how competitive the top 14 is, you may not get back to a final, because that's the nature of it. We've seen it before. We've seen it with Montpellier, you know, winners 2 years ago, almost relegated this year. Like, there's probably that element to it as well. Yes, you lost a final, but you got to a final.
Yeah, that's certainly not part of the plan, Caelan. Not to get to it again, but yeah, you're right, and I think I spoke about it before about just kind of not letting the highs be too high and not letting the lows be too low. You know, it was an incredibly difficult day, disappointing for everybody involved, and ultimately, though, you've got to look at the season over a longer period of time. We've got to identify what we did well. We got to identify some areas that we can be better, and then you get busy getting better. That's, you know, absolutely the nature of it. And, you know, we've spoken about things that, you know, last season, for example, we'd never won at Toulon, you know, so that was something that we did. We'd struggled to beat La Rochelle and Toulouse in recent seasons, and obviously managed to win both of those games at home. So there was lots of positives. You know, we went to Bayonne, and Bayonne, I think, we're unbeaten in 28 home games. So, you know, managed to win there as well. So lots of positives along the way. And as I mentioned already, before the final, there was inconsistencies and times where we just weren't good enough. And sometimes having the ability to look back and say exactly that. There were things that just were not good enough. And the reality of whatever way the final went, that would still be the case. And that still would very much be my conviction. So I think for us, by the attack of the season, trying to put yourself in the best possible place as you can, being as consistent as you can, and improving in the areas where you can, whilst trying to reflect on the stuff that was done well and understand why it was good as well. So yeah, that's the exciting part of it, I guess. And it'll come around very quickly. We play our first preseason game next week against Pau. The following week we play Leinster for the first time in the club's history, I think. And then the following week we play Stade Francais in Chaban in the first game of the top 14. So it'll all happen very quickly.
And like, I'm not gonna put words into your mouth or anything, but as well as that, like, if you're a coach, I've never ever heard a coach say you've had a perfect day or a perfect season, and that's a part of the mindset of it as well. You can't, even if you were in Ugo Moller's shoes and you'd won that top 14 final, he's not saying it went perfect, because it's probably things that went wrong for them as well, and that is rugby in its purest form. With the season ahead, and I'll skip past the fact that you're playing Leinster, because this will go out after that game, I expect. But like, we take a look at the one thing that stood out to me, you take a look at the ins and outs. It's such a fluid transfer market in France. I think French rugby is the closest thing we have to like Premier League football in rugby. At least that's my belief. But having said all that, even with the squad turnover, the fact that you were so close last year for big name players like Yoram Moefana, Maxime Lussou, Damien Penaud, etc., and yourselves as coaches, there must be a squad there that's absolutely chomping at the bit to get back to it and to maybe not right the wrongs, but you just go one step further, because every team at this part of the season or this part of the year must be feeling the same way.
Yeah, of course. You that's the objective. That's the challenge. That's what motivates good players. I think we're very clear. I think we've got a good squad. We've got a good group of players, and we're going to work hard to get better. Some of the guys you mentioned there, Yoram, he's 23. Nico is 21 this year. Louis Bilberry is 20. Marco Gazzotti is 19. So if you're telling me that these guys have reached their peak, we probably wouldn't agree with that. So lots of room for progress. Very excited about where we can get to as a group, and again, there's going to be ups and downs along the way, and it's how we react and progress from them that ultimately will define how our season goes. But certainly we won't be lacking in motivation anyway, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And I do wish you best luck for the upcoming season. And I do apologize if any Ulster fans that are listening aren't wishing you best of luck with the fact that you're drawn against them, but that's the beauty of sport as well. Before we go, I want to get a bonus question in, and it's something we're going to do for this series. You've coached some great players. Sia Khaleesi, Damien Penaud, probably top of that list. From my perspective, I'm not going to put words into your mouth, but if there was 5 players, past or present, you'd love to have worked with, that you haven't already done so, who would you be putting forth?
Yeah, very, very difficult question to answer. I don't know if I'm going to give you 5. I will give one. And I love versatile players. I love players that can play more than one position. We have one here at Bordeaux. Well, we've many, but one who played the most is probably Pablo Uberti, who played 11, 12, 13, and 14 in the season just gone. But for me, probably the best example of that was Matt Gitu. I probably would have been one of the guys that I think he started at 9, 10, 12, 13. I think he did a stint at fullback as well. Somebody who would have been a fantastic guy in a 7-1 split, I think. That would probably, but outside of that, I know it's a boring answer. I very much look at the group of players that we have and love working with them. It is as simple as that, Caolan. I'll give you 2 that I would love to have seen have a crack at being professional rugby players. One is Bobby Holland, who I coached at the UCD. He played for Michaels. Again, very versatile guy. Played 9, 10 and 12 in Senior Cup of Michaels and in the AIL. Fantastic player, who I think would have been a brilliant professional rugby player. And the other one is David Quirk, who David Quirk played 10 for Clongowes in 2010 and 2011. And probably could have been a version of Matthew Jalibert. Yeah, would love to have seen the two of those, and would love to have had the opportunity to work with the two of those in a professional setting. But that's probably as far as I'm prepared to go with that one.
I can't argue with any of those either. I know Matt Gato is still playing a bit of MLR, so like there's still a chance. I mean, he might be willing to go to the back to the top 14 again 10 years later, but you know, there's still a chance. No,
Yeah, and it's a fascinating one on that. You know, I spent a very short period of time with Ruan Pinar when I went over to the Sharks first. But like you talk about people that have longevity in the game, you know, and you ask what do they have? Well, their desire to train and get better and compete. You know, Ruan at 40 years of age, watching him play in the Curry Cup last season was remarkable, really. So yeah, he's one that I did work with, so I couldn't mention.
yeah, that's fair. I mean, not many players have like a 20 odd year
Yeah,
career or
yeah,
something like that. Like he was
yeah.
2007, he won the World Cup, retired in 2014, so a little bit more than 17 years at least, but absolutely a great shout as well. No, thank you very much for joining me, and sincerely mean, you know, best of luck with the season ahead. I know I probably shouldn't say this, probably not the most professional, but I know plenty of fans who were rooting for you gallantly last season in the pool stages because of who was in your pool. I'm not on about Connacht. I just put it that way, but you know, it's best luck with the season ahead, and I hope it does go well. And for everyone at home, I hope they listened and they enjoyed it, and plenty of nuggets to pick up on in there as well. We'll be back later in the week with a very special deep dive on French rugby, looking at some of the things we talked about in terms of the culture, the attendances, and why it is thriving so much on this post World Cup year, I suppose we could call it. No, again, thanks very much, and thanks home for everyone for listening. If you do like what you see or hear, please do subscribe. You can find all the links to channels below. But for now, and until next time, take it easy.